using your comment section, so please feel free to do that during the prayer time or other times that you would like to respond. As we begin our worship service and get ourselves organized this morning, let's begin by greeting each other and opening our worship service.
Welcome all. May God be gracious to us and bless us.
May God's grace shine upon us so that God's ways are known.
Make your wholeness available to all the nations.
Let the land yield its harvest with the fullness of blessing.
Our God has come to bless.
And all the earth will be filled with awe.
People of God, rise in gratitude as we sing 2236, Gather Us In. The words are on the screen and in your bulletin.
Brought we prepare to go before God in prayer, I invite you to name those things about which you are asking others to join you. We begin, of course, with our gratitudes. For what are you grateful today?
The beautiful color of the leaves as they reflect off water and off as we drive by. They're just so beautiful.
Autumn is in the air, isn't
And
it?
as the sun shines through.
For all God's goodness.
Thanks be to God.
Other gratitudes? Yes.
For my sister Frances, who is at the end of her radiation and doing well.
Do well, Francis, for all God's goodness.
Thanks be to God.
Oh,
Yes.
and for my sister Lillian, who was here, she had a pain block, and it did remarkable. She's free of pain.
Free of pain. That's always
That's
good.
great.
For all God's goodness.
Thanks be to God.
Other gratitudes? Concerns? Things that are happening in your life or world? Yes.
One of Barry's cousins passed away on Monday, very fast moving form of cancer. He was at my wife's funeral back in 2020. He was under disability, and this happened, I think, last year or the week before that he had this, and then the following Monday he died.
Mary's family, God in your mercy.
Hear our prayers.
Yes.
One of the big breast cancer 5Ks is today here in Birmingham area, and so we want to remember all those facing breast cancer.
All facing breast cancer, God in your mercy.
Hear our prayers.
Yes.
Is Adam still in Poland?
Yes. They're still in
So
Poland.
let's pray, I don't know if that's a gratitude or, but, yeah, I just want him to be okay and get back home.
We want Adam coming home, God in your mercy.
Hear our prayers.
Yes.
My brother-in-law's brother, he's also a good friend of mine, Dennis Haynes, is in St. Vincent's with Lewy body dementia, and he's going down really fast, and they are keeping him there until they can find a facility for him to go to, because he can't be on his own anymore. So just prayers that we can find a really good place for him.
For Dennis.
Dennis.
For Dennis. God in your mercy.
Hear our prayers.
Yes. Yes.
Lily Lawson?
Lily Lawson. We think she has COVID. God in your mercy.
Hear our prayers.
We're thinking about you guys. Any others? Let's join together as one and go before God in prayer. Your presence fills the silence, O God, and holds us in your mystery. We are grateful for these opportunities to just sit and experience your grace, to speak the things that are important to us, and to hear the things that are important to each other. Open our hearts and lives today, that we may hear your touch, your word, feel your touch, know your presence in all that we do and all that we are. For in all we are grateful for these blessings and for your grace with us as we sing together. Then will our prayers bring joy.
Our contemporary reading is by Justine Garter. The most subversive people are those who ask questions. Giving answers is not nearly as threatening. Any one question can be more explosive than 1,000 answers. Sitting or standing, let us offer our reverence for the word from God as found in the Gospel according to Luke chapter 18. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing alone, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like the other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this one went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. Listen for the word from God.
Thanks be to God. If you have been in church for any part of your life, you have probably heard at some point the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, or maybe you heard it called the Pharisee and the publican. It's probably one of the most easily quotable ones in our joint memories. But it's one of those things that you might not have ever asked yourself the question. Have you ever wondered why parables are used in the first place? Why in the world did they decide to teach, did Jesus decide to teach, and the Bible decide to record parables? Because you have to know that parables are the odd ducks in the Bible. They only occur in the Gospels according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John's Gospel has none. No other book in the Bible uses parables. So it seems that Jesus and the disciples used this kind of teaching in the very early part of the emergence of the Christian church out of Judaism. By the time that John's Gospel was written, which is probably 80 to 100 years after the time of Jesus, the church was no longer using parables as teaching tools. So over the centuries, there's been a lot of discussion about what part parables may have played during the life and ministry of Jesus and the emergence of the church. And the more we study them, the more we discover that there are different kinds of parables. They use different kinds of ways of teaching, but that there's one thing in common that all the parables have, and that is that there was a subversive quality to parables.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, lazy scholarship over the centuries has meant that most Christians have missed this subversive quality. It is one of the ways we now have such horrible theology in many parts of Christianity, because that subversion was missed and the parables were interpreted in other kinds of ways. And so some of the things that happens in parables are not good things. Some of the things that happen in parables make you think that one parable is speaking against another. But the thing that if you keep in mind, and if you're able to pay attention to, is the ways in which those parables subvert something, then they start to fill in together, start making sense in a religious situation. Over the last 40 years or so, some scholars have been able to identify how this subversion works in parables in the context of first century Christianity. And we remember what was happening in this part of the Christian story. You see, Jerusalem and the state of Israel still existed in this part of the Christian story. But by the year 60, the Romans had destroyed everything. It was all gone. So by the time John's gospel was written, and by the time the letters of Paul and the others in the Newer Testament, this all is talking about after this time period. Our parable this morning is one of those early ones. And this parable is one of those that has been misused or misunderstood.
Yeah.
We usually read this parable without recognizing its subversive nature. So in that kind of a reading, you get the Pharisee represents a religious elite. The tax collector is the epitome of regret. The tax collector is forgiven by God. The Pharisee leaves unforgiven by God. And that's how I was taught to understand this parable. Maybe you were as well. Read this way, this parable raises a lot more questions than answers. First thing to keep in mind is the identification of the second person in this parable as a tax collector is a little bit off, because this person was actually a toll collector. Now, this was also a religious toll collector, not a tax collector hired by the Romans. This was a toll collector hired by the temple to buy the animals for sacrifice. If you did not come with your own animal to sacrifice, you had to buy one, and there was a toll on that. And this was the person hired by the religious leaders, a.k.a. Pharisees, to buy a thing so you could do your sacrifice. So this parable is often called the Pharisee and the tax collector, but we need to keep in mind that even though a toll collector was a kind of tax collector, it's not the ones we usually think of. Because we think of tax collection by the Romans, and they certainly did that. So the toll collector was given a fee so that the public could gain access services to the temple. Some toll collectors also could have been tax collectors by the Romans. But this parable is about a temple toll collector. The ones who collected a toll for worship, for access to God, for access to parts of the temple. He was not collecting taxes on goods produced. This is a minor distinction, but it is an important one. You see, the temple played a central role in the self-identity of the Jewish people and in the emerging church coming out of Judaism. It was the place everyone was connected, even if they didn't live in the area. People came from all over Israel to the temple in Jerusalem to offer their sacrifices. The religious system set in place was that the people would bring a sacrifice, they would bring an animal, something to do, to offer, they would pay a toll, very important for this parable, and then have their sacrifice offered by the priest. For this system to work, the only place that you could do this was in the temple. And the peasants of the nation had to buy into this idea that the temple was the only place where this could happen, and they had to pay for it. In effect, participating in worship was an act of taxation, officially sanctioned and religiously enforced by the Pharisee. Starting to see how this connects? They were the beneficiaries of the religious tax. Now you know why the tax collector's prayer in this parable would be so offensive to the original listeners. Playing on this superstition of the people whose naivete meant that they thought that any slight to God would have dire consequences on their crops, their well-being, their family. The religious elite, aka Pharisees, used this devotion to extract obliged payments, tolls. Even if the peasant had to impoverish themselves by giving away the surplus of their crop to pay this toll at the temple, they would do so to prevent being vilified or stigmatized or not being good and faithful people to God. In essence, the temple system had become no less oppressive than the Roman occupation. The temple tolls became so high and so intermingled with the people's sense of obligation to God that the whole system amounts to spiritual violence against the poor.
Yeah.
You know, the people could not avoid Roman taxation because of military occupation. They could not resist temple tolls because it risked their relationship with God. They could become shunned. They could be denied access to the temple, and therefore their faith, their livelihood, their relationship to God was exploited in the name of God as being resistors to God's will if they didn't buy into the system. And here's where the subversive nature of the parable starts to come into focus. And it is fascinating to me to see how effective this parable is in revealing truth. Because this parable is actually about two toll collectors. The one who collected the temple tax and the one who benefited from the temple tax.
All right.
So it's not just the toll collector who bought into the system and made it such the way it was. It was also the ones who benefited from that system, that bought into the system and perpetuated its existence. Is this sounding any familiar to anything? The Pharisee and the toll collector colluded to present to the people that the only way to have access to God is if you pay us to get there. Now, we hear it in the prayers that both men are quoted in our parable. The Pharisee's posture is described briefly while his prayer is long. And the toll collector's prayer is brief while his posture is described at length. So we have two examples of worship behavior described in unexpected ways. Because the ways in which their culture was working was that only one of them was vilified. The toll collector was the villain in their culture. And the villain is the one seeking forgiveness. The holy, quotes, holy Pharisee acts in a snobby way towards others. The toll collector, unlike the tax collectors for the Romans, was contracted to collect temple taxes. And toll collectors, because of that, were considered the lowest of the low because they often used extortion and intimidation to get the tolls they collected in the same style that tax collectors did for the Romans. A toll collector, like a tax collector, was considered so unreliable and so despicable, they were explicitly prohibited under Jewish law from being able to be called as a witness to a trial.
Wow.
And it is this one Jesus pronounces who will find justification.
Amen.
Do you see how this is usurping every kind of assumption and way of being in the systems that everybody participated in, even without thinking about the ways they participated in it? It usurps all of that undergirding and throws it into question.
Yeah.
The Pharisee finds no justification, even though according to the parable, he claims to have done nothing wrong. He simply participated in the system. Everybody buys in the system, so I'm just going along with what everybody else does. This is the system we have, so I'll just participate it and benefit from it because I have stature. He thanked God, declared his love for Torah, and that he had exceeded expectations for what it meant to be a good person. The parable presents us with a riddle. And here is where the subversion is complete. In any society, culture, nation, different groups define themselves with boundaries of character and behavior. And we use these phrases without even thinking about how we are participating in the system. But things like criminal, citizen, do-gooder, loner. You see, it is the subversion of the parable that those definitions no longer work. We can't hide behind the definitions.
Yeah.
The value of the toll collector and the Pharisee are both subverted by their character. They were both following the system according to what it was established, but their characters are revealed by this parable. The usual pattern where those who follow the rules are raised to prominence and those who do not follow the rules are labeled as deviant or called into question by this parable. The parable threatens the unconscious assumption that upends the popular support of the established order, and who gets to define who is deviant and who is spiritual. The subversion is so jarring that our minds gasp at the contradictions in how reality is described. So this is done, first of all, by demonstrating that the usual rules do not either define value or cover it. Enforcement of the rules are often their benefactors. Who gets to make the rules and who benefits from the rules. And lastly, by emphasizing the lack of means to resolve that crisis. How do we get out of such systems when we find ourselves participating in them? And make no mistake, we participate in the systems that we have. Subversion of assumptions creates chaos of conscience. Because devotion to a rule or a system is now questioned and is now threatened. We lose our ability to stigmatize the deviant through status-degrading rituals. Did you even know you had status-degrading rituals? Here's some examples of status-degrading rituals. Name calling. Trials. And it was not so long ago, signs on bathroom windows and doors of who could use it. for the Pharisee, where prominence was sustained by that very system that was abusive. Position meant being emulated and honored. Those with power get to define everyone else. In this parable, both the Pharisee and the toll collector belong to a parallel system of tribute. The Pharisee is a privileged toll collector and dismisses as deviant the one authorized by religion to collect the toll that benefits the powerful. Or another way to say it is, the Pharisee is just as much a religious toll collector as the toll collector.
Amen.
Now, the original listeners to these stories are just like us. They would assume nothing good can come from this deviant toll collector, who was constantly an example of shaking people down, the very people that we all think are the ones we need to take care of, the poor, the without, those that don't have access to privilege. Accept humiliation and pain and shame, because collecting tolls from the poor to access God was one of the most shameful occupations imaginable. So up to the point where the Pharisee issues his pronouncement of condemnation on the toll collector in the name of religious position, and noticed by using the language of prayer. I thank God I'm not like this toll collector. The script at this point would have called for the toll collector to leave in shame and silence. Instead, he beats his chest, cries out in an act of contrition, and asks to be included in the atonement that the worshiping body is there to witness. He recognizes his shameful participation in his duplicity with the Pharisees and the religious institutions and the appeals to a higher authority that must buy into that system to have access to that higher authority. And that higher authority is God's grace.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to receive and to participate in.
Yeah.
And that grace has always usurped, subverted the very institutions that had been built around giving people access for a price.
Yeah.
He breaks through the intimidation. He breaks through the fear of authority that has been placed on him, and he challenges the Pharisees' reading of God's judgment. This subverted the assumed power structure, the assumed religious authority, and the assumption that access to God was limited in this process. The one they were participating in, the one they had set up, the one they had bought into to make sure some had to pay their very life's wealth to access.
Yeah.
Now do you understand why the religious leaders colluded with the Roman government
You're right at first.
to have Jesus executed?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus' teaching allowed peasants to demystify the temple's collusion with oppression,
Yeah.
with its moral prominence, so that peasants could now name oppression, could now name its moral prominence, so that peasants now could reimagine their connection to God, reimagine their faith journey, and find the voice of the silence that gives the voice of grace the ability to speak truth to power, even religious power.
Even religious power.
And who did Jesus say that day went home justified? You know, we are facing the same kind of entrenched religious retaliation that Jesus warned about in the first century. Whenever access is broadened to allow more of God's creation to be part? What does the established religious organization typically do? No. You can't be here because of, well, let's create a moral problem for you. You're poor. That must be God's judgment. You're a foreigner. You weren't born in the right place. You're gay. We all know what you do. That's what religious institutions do without thinking. Just a gut-wrench reaction. Because that's how systems work if we don't pay attention. So I want to suggest some ways to proceed. First of all, become aware of ways religion benefits from the powerful and stigmatizes the vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know, I am grateful to be a part of a congregation that asks these kinds of questions, that has struggled with it for years, that has been a place to say we might not have gotten it right in the past. So let's figure out a new way to do it. Become aware of the ways that religion benefits from the powerful and stigmatizes the vulnerable.
Yeah.
And name it for what it is. Those labeled deviant by the powerful get to challenge the powerful.
Yeah.
Go deviants. Let's go deviants. We need to pay attention to how our own assumptions take us to places we don't want to go. So let us allow grace to be our guide about how we think about church and God and our faith journey and what it means to be a Christian. And finally, it is always those with power who have the greatest ability to believe one's own press.
Yep.
Especially when it makes us winners at the expense of making the vulnerable losers.
Absolutely.
If you've ever wondered if the Bible could speak to our current realities, this subversive parable blows that assumption out of the water. And there are more like it in the Bible. These are not nice little stories that people told to say how nice it was to be a Christian. These were stories told in ways to subvert things that we didn't know needed to be subverted, and that we resist when we find out that we're on the wrong side sometimes. Christians are called to worship, to love, to care, to be open to others, and we are called to think, to listen, to stay aware.
Yes.
Because it is so easy to be drawn into this the way things are. We can either participate in not paying attention to how privilege operates in our own lives, or we can participate in subversive grace. We quit participating in the rules, the structures, the systems that perpetuate some being winners at the expense of making someone else losers.
Yes.
And I believe and I hope that it is still that subversive grace that can open our eyes to see. Our eyes always need better vision.
Yes,
There's always something new to perceive.
yes.
Because systems and structures and the way things are is so easy to simply go with the flow. Subversive grace has been the answer for the church throughout its history. Because when we see it, we can no longer participate in it. When we see it, we can do something about it.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
Now is the time we have the opportunity to share what we have with others. You can do that here, or there are ways to donate on the screen.
I have a song I love to sing since I have been redeemed.
Amen.
We are grateful, O God, for all the ways that your grace breaks through our lives and hearts. And as we give of our time, our worth, our value, and our privilege, may it be used to make others available to your grace. In your name we pray. Amen. Final song is Pass Me By, O Gentle Savior. Words are in your mood.
While on others you are calling,
asked Jan to let me do the announcements because things are starting to get complicated as the holiday season comes up. So I just want to be able to run through some things with you. Book club continues to meet on Sunday morning. We're completing our book in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be starting a new one in about 3 weeks. Thank you for worship leaders and for those of you that filled in today. I appreciate that. Please sign up for future ones. You don't have to wait till next Sunday to do the following Sunday. There's all the weeks out there. Just find the vacant spot and put your name in there. We'd appreciate it. The houseless ministry is still collecting items. Do we need particular things this week that would be helpful?
Well, it's starting to be colder weather, so we can think about long sleeves and warm socks.
Okay. So cold weather kinds of clothing would be good to bring in. You know the items for recycling that are in the kitchen. We have a Southeastern Conference meeting coming up by Zoom. It's going to be on October 27th, this coming Thursday. And Zoom information is here. It is also on our Facebook page. If you want to be able to go there and just click it rather than try to put all this information in, you can do that. It's open to anyone. What we're doing is presenting a resolution to pass in our conference to be presented to the General Synod coming up this summer. So our conference, Southeast Conference, and the Florida Conference are also participating in this, and we're also trying to get some other conferences to participate. And it's basically around the value of transgender folks and non-binary people having value in our congregations and our church systems. Again, this is one of those privileged things that we're pushing the wall further back on so that others can have access. So that is Thursday night, 6:30 our time. So I hope you'll join us for that. This coming Saturday, we are hosting a Halloween event for our neighborhood here. And so we're going to have a movie that night, and we think that movie is going to be The Munsters.
A brand new Munster.
Yeah, the brand new Munsters. So we'll be showing that out here.
Let's see how they came to be a family.
So it's the backstory of the
Early
Munsters.
days.
So if you've never known the backstory of the Munsters, we hope you'll be here. We're going to invite the neighborhood. We encourage you to bring things to eat, snacky kinds of things, finger foods, snacks, that kind of stuff.
Milk duds.
Sandwiches, milk duds.
I got milk duds.
She's got the milk duds
We
covered.
got plenty of popcorn.
Okay. Coming up, cooking next month for the shelters. We actually have now 2 teams that are cooking. The Firehouse Shelter is on November 11th at 6 p.m. If you want to join that cook, see me. We cook at the Firehouse Shelter. The same night, some of the women of our congregation are cooking for the First Light Women's Center, and they are cooking here at the church. So either one of those are available to you. Please do that. We've set the annual congregational meeting for January 15th. Put that on your calendar now so that you know it is happening. Yes.
One thing about the women's shelter cooking, if you didn't do that last time but you'd like to do it, you're welcome to come. It was Liva and Carol and me and Shayla. Is that Ellie's name right? And Lily.
Hey, Lily.
But, you know, if there are any other women that want to do that, it was fairly time.
Takes a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So cook the food here and just deliver it over there
you have to serve it,
and serve it. Okay.
but it didn't take all night or anything. Also, I think our little library is empty, so if anybody
is.
has any, recent fiction, I think that's what people like to get out of our little library. I'm not reading fast enough to keep it stocked. So, if you have a book you want to get rid of, just go ahead and put it in the library, the little box outside.
We appreciate it. Oh, I know. The final thing I just want to get your opinion on. This year, Christmas is on Sunday. Christmas Day is on Sunday, as well as New Year's Day is on Sunday. And we have had a discussion amongst the council, and I did so with Sunday schools as well this morning. We just want to get your feel for, we typically have, when Christmas is not on a Sunday, we typically do a Christmas Eve service. And the last couple of years, we've been doing that jointly with Covenant, so that is still planned for this year. Covenant is not having a Christmas Day service on Sunday, and I've just want to get a feel for you whether you want us to also have a Christmas Day service that day. So if you have strong feelings or you don't care or what, just talk to me after service and let's just get a feel. Right now, the inclination is just doing the Christmas Eve service. So far, people have said they want to do something with family on Christmas Day, but I want to hear from you. And those of you that are listening by Zoom, if you have an opinion, please send it to me as well. Any other announcements? Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being subversive in the ways that you have discovered that your life is subversive. And thank you for being open to the ways that God may continue to lead us in ways that we never imagined. Amen.
Please stand with me and sing, I Stand Amazed.